Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Joshua, friend, let's have a bit of a bant about EA because there's a couple of things worth touching on in regards to the fallout from just what just happened with Anthem, i.e. Anthem being canned by EA after a sort of a year of potentially revamping it, trying to still do their games as a live service type thing. And in the fallout from that, there's two things that I think are worth touching on. One being an interview with IGN with their chief studios officer, Laura Meal, and another thing from Jason Schreier over on Bloomberg, that both just sort of confirm that internally they've had a bit of a rethink as to the many mistakes they've made across the last few years. So the first thing to talk about is the IGN interview, is Laura Meal, who says that in her first 100 days since becoming the chief studios officer, she's the person who helped, she literally sat down with all the game development studio heads and just said, look, what do you guys want to do? Like, what do the fans want? What do you guys think is best for the brand? And apparently from that initial meeting, she was able to get, she's the reason the Battlefront 2 got completely turned around by letting them sort of focus on the DLC and the different content packs and everything. The Mass Effect Trilogy remake also came from this. The Command & Conquer remaster and Skate 4 being allowed to exist apparently all came from these sorts of meetings. And she does say that with the new dev team that's making Skate 4, they wanted to call them Full Circle because she says we wanted to make sure that we were going to become Full Circle, that EA become, go Full Circle, which to me it feels like a reference to the 2000s EA back when they were putting their money in, the likes of the Lord of the Rings games or the James Bond games or even the Simpsons game, where they weren't just sort of, monetizing the living hell out of everything left, right, and center. And so in amongst all this stuff is a comment on Titanfall 3, because the overall sort of mandate from Meal is that, she wants to make sure that the power within the company goes to the game devs, that they're not being, told to implement different functionalities and things that aren't going to work for the brands themselves. So with Titanfall, she says that Respawn are the ones to determine what the future holds for Apex and Titanfall. She says she doesn't believe in directing or telling games teams what to create. It has to come from the player community and the inspiration and motivation of developers. And she also mentions that Anthem was essentially, canned. IGN said that the timing of the interview was like a day before the official announcement. But she does mention that Anthem was ultimately canned because BioWare were just better served focusing on Mass Effect and Dragon Age. There's something to be said about Dragon Age as well from the Schreier interview, but what do you think of all of this stuff so far?
Well, it's funny, Scott, because when I was first kind of reading it, or I saw the headlines circulating, I didn't buy it because that's my own fault because I'm so entrenched in the fact that it's EA will never change. When you actually dive into it and you see the changes that have been made, it does give you a bit of hope because all of the stuff you just mentioned there, like these games getting greenlit, putting the developers' own creativity first over trying to mandate, live services or monetization aspects, like all of that is good. You could argue that's what they should have been doing from the start, but at the same time, you've got to recognize that this is a step in the right direction, and hopefully it does result in a future where we get really good games from these really great studios, and hopefully EA uses these studios in a way that kind of just does them justice, because there's been so many times where they've picked someone up, a really talented developer, and we've just had to kind of watch them languish, become a shell of their former selves, and then eventually, get shut down. So these steps that are currently in place, like greenlighting Skate, which I was so excited about there, just spat all over my screen. That would never have happened 4 or 5 years ago or anything. That would be more or less inconceivable. But the fact that studios are getting made to create games like that, the fact that we're going to return to what the devs want to do, whether that's single player games or multiplayer games or whatever, all sounds like a good big win for me. Of course, I'm going to be cautious, but at the same time, secretly hopeful.
Well, yeah, same. I mean, the other thing to throw in is if you want an example of I'm not going to call them the old EA yet because we're yet to see how things go. There's obviously, I mean, it mentioned also in this report is the general attitude towards FIFA and Madden, and just saying that, look, if they want to implement different changes for those games, and because of the size of those games, like the reality of game development and everything else, she says that, if anything's going to change with the likes of FIFA and Madden, it'll take at least 3 years for those things to just be implemented. But she does say that they do have new team members that are looking into different ways to make those games. It's all very hovering around the idea that EA's been a bit naff for a long time, and they used to be better. and let's try and get back to that. And so like she does sort of like, hover around those general sentiments and just say that, look, we're trying to sort of, come full circle, get better, and go back to how things were. The other thing to mention is the report from Jason Schreier over on Bloomberg, which came out after the Anthem thing, in talking about Dragon Age, and that, that game apparently, Dragon Age 4 apparently started development back in 2015. But in 2017, that was when EA stepped in and told BioWare that they wanted a multiplayer component and wanted it to, as is referred to internally, it became Anthem with Dragons, which that made Michael Aidlaw, the creative director, just leave. He was just like, well, screw this. This obviously sucks, which it did, which it sounded like it did. And so that was the mandate 2 years in, was literally EA doing an EA and stepping in. But the new report from Schreier, or at least part of that, says that recently EA have now gone back to BioWare and just said, actually, we don't need that. Don't do the multiplayer thing because Anthem completely tanked. And they've hung that decision on the fact that Anthem went south and that Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, still sold 10 million copies, even though it was a dedicated single-player game. So they're literally just sort of sitting back and going like, we've got everything wrong. And we as the people who play these things and who have been watching them, everybody at home and everything else, knew this was the case from day one, and that Anthem was never going to work, and something like Jedi Fallen Order was always going to go down more positively. But it's good to see, alongside the internal changes from the likes of Laura Meal, that they seem to be at least acknowledging the terrible stuff.
And thank God, Scott, because, we were talking yesterday whenever the news broke about Anthem and we did the video on it, we were saying, will EA actually learn anything from this when it comes to how they manage BioWare going forward? And this, more or less, is a big fat yes that says, all right, look, if BioWare doesn't want to do live service multiplayer elements or include them in Mass Effect or Dragon Age, we're not going to make them do it. And we can go back to, what I think the fans ultimately want, which is a single-player focused, story-driven Dragon Age game, a single-player focused, story-driven Mass Effect game. Not that there can't be multiplayer elements, of course, if that's what the developers are passionate about, but the fact that these things aren't mandated from the start, from the top down or whatever, like that's ultimately a good thing. And I think the two games that are pointed out, Jedi Fallen Order and Anthem, the success of the former and the complete disaster of the latter, like that's so telling. Like 10 million copies for a game, like that is really good going. And the fact that EA didn't expect Jedi Fallen Order to sell that well, despite the fact that everyone seemed to be so hyped to finally play a single-player Star Wars game, and it's what they were asking for like 7 years, kind of shows you a little bit how out of touch with their fans and their audience that they actually were. But at least people, we talk so much about voting with your wallet and stuff. People actually did that here. No one bought Anthem, everyone bought Jedi Fallen Order, and that ultimately forced EA, I suppose, to take notice and be like, okay, so this is what we should have been doing. It's so obvious. I get if you're in their shoes, let's take it the business person's point of view of just saying like, well, this formula sells. Hey, look, Destiny's doing it. We should do our version of that. Let's make Anthem that. Let's make every game that. Let's do games as a service, left, right, and center. How much money will that make? High fives all around. But the sheer reality of I don't know, I always come back to the fact that I think a gaming audience, a gaming demographic, is one of the most learned audiences out there. It's not like mainstream audiences don't reject, really marketed spreadsheet toss in movie form as well, but I think that gamers get vocal as hell about this stuff. And we said in the other video that like everybody has a friend who plays games who tells you to stay away from a certain thing, and I think once that momentum has taken hold, then it is going to have an effect eventually, and these nakedly soulless business-minded moves are not going to work long term, and clearly haven't, and I'm always glad of that. You mentioned the whole thing about them being so out of touch. It was only, I think, 2011, 2012-ish when they said that single-player games are dead. When they were just like, oh no, everybody wants multiplayer, and that's totally the way that it's going to go. And it's like, no, like I understand that the people at the top are older and they don't necessarily get the medium. They have to look at it from a stepping back and look at the statistics and what worked, and let's focus on that. But they could not be more wrong so many times in a row. One of my favorite things, / worst things about the entire gaming industry is when people just like tell us things like single-player games are dead. No one wants to play them, and it's like, have you got any sources for that, my friend? Like, where are you getting this from? Just because you're telling us this thing doesn't mean that it's real. It might be something you want to become real, but it doesn't mean that it's real in the moment. And I think we've seen that reflected in a pretty difficult fight back against it over like the past few years. But when it comes to like the live service stuff, I always think, whether it's EA, whether it's Square Enix, whoever, either. There's always like some arrogance to it. It's like, yeah, we can make so much money from live service games. But that's like me saying, well, I could make so much money if I just made an Avengers movie. You know what I mean? If I could just make a superhero movie on that scale. And it's like, but how am I going to get from point A to B? There's more than just saying I want to do that. You know what I mean? Like there are lots of steps you have to go through. First and foremost, you have to create a compelling game that the developers want to make and that fans want to play. And that's always the two key pillars that get lost in this whole conversation. It seems every single time this happens, it's that executive A goes, look, live service games make billions of dollars. We want a live service game. And then they skip to the end, you know what I mean? Without doing the work in the middle or at least getting the ducks in the row to make that.
What the Avengers felt like. It was just sort of like you had this immaculate art department, you know, like obviously the really good character performances, voice actors and everything, incredible cast, but just completely fell down in regards to like adding those monetizable elements because they were so unwanted. You could feel the game actively rejecting them, like it just got in the way of everything else. And I think that, I'm here for EA sort of going like, look, we've had a bit of a laugh, but let's just sort of like knuckle down and actually do projects that people do want to play. Like you said, it's like even the games that have like a strong will from beginning to end, like God of War, still didn't come together till the final couple of months of development. And even that had everybody, you know, pulling in the same direction with zero outside interference, other than, you know, a couple of sort of Sony people who checked in on that development and just said, what are you guys doing with Kratos? But it all worked out in the end. And I think that it's like a miracle that anything comes together anyway, let alone outside forces saying, you've got to crowbar this in. The thing is, to sort of like round it all out, you know, there's no mention of Andrew Wilson in any of this report. He's the dude who initially spearheaded the whole loot box thing at the end of the 2000s, which obviously went on to dominate their business, directives going forward. That has obviously now backfired, so I kind of wonder what his input is, like whether he sort of learns from that. Do they still want to do aggressive monetization, or do they then pull the other way because that's the way that things are leaning? And in regards to Dragon Age 4 specifically, because all the multiplayer stuff has been taken out, does that then elongate that game's development even more? Because they apparently have been working on multiplayer components for over 3 years now, so I don't know, like I guess like where do you see the balance going? Because it's not like EA is not going to make a lot of money. They're going to have to try and find a way to balance the two.
Yeah, just because they're saying this certainly doesn't mean that live service games aren't going to come out from EA or that, you know, games aren't going to have potentially aggressive monetization in them. It's just a small win that's no longer a blanket thing. Hopefully, this is like they're going to be no longer going into studios like BioWare or whoever and saying like, give us this FIFA, give us Ultimate Team. You know what I mean? They're going to allow studios to play to their strengths, and in some cases that will be live service experiences. In other cases, it absolutely will not. I don't want to, you know, just like declare victory right now and be like, right, this is good now, actually, and things are going to be great from now on. It's obviously going to continue to be a process, but in terms of, you know, shifting a massive ship like EA, it is, you know, it's a promising front, and I think like Dragon Age in particular, yes, probably will take a few extra years in the oven now and will take a little longer to make, but at the same time, hopefully that will result in a better game and ultimately a game that the fans actually want. It does make me feel bad for all of the creatives that have jumped ship on that project over the years, though, because they didn't like the approach and the focus, and now I bet they're like, oh, man, come on, you do this now? Seriously? Like, after all the battles we tried to fight? Like,
Casey Hudson came back. I wonder if, like, someone like Mike Laidlaw would come back. Because, like, the terrain has just changed enough where it's like he can't actually execute on the vision of the sequel that he wanted to do. It's so cute. I mean, all those projects, like Mass Effect, like, you know, it has lost its lead creatives, and it's like, well, what the hell is that going to look like going forward? I guess, like, Mac Walters is still there, but Drew Carpenter and Casey Hudson, they've left. The one thing I want to know is if anybody was sitting in that initial executive meeting with Laura Meal, who represented Simpsons Hit and Run, because where the living hell is that game? If they want to greenlight something for the fans, just put it out. Just put it out in HD. It's not hard, just up-res it. I think the PC mods have already done that.
I'm not saying that that's the end game of this whole enterprise, but I'm also not saying that, Scott Tailford. I'm
not going to lie, right? That is literally the turning point. If you want to talk about declaring victory, victory is declared the day that EA release a new version of Simpsons Hit and Run. We're putting that on the table.
But yes, refer back to this.
Yes, definitely. Let us know what you think down in the comments below. Do you trust EA to stick to any sort of goodwill mandate going forward, or is this just a temporary thing in a sea of sludge? For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.